Zero waste planning and infrastructure. Next slide. When you look at managing discards, I like to break it into upstream and downstream. We're really getting down into the weeds here, talking about managers, whether you're a facility manager at a factory or a solid waste coordinator for a city, a zero waste manager. You're dealing with the discards in your organization. I understand that we are multitasking. We have to worry about wastewater and hazardous waste and building and construction debris, sure, but the bottom line is how you get the discards that are generated. So I look at it either upstream or downstream. Upstream meaning clean production, product redesign, and product stewardship. Next slide. And then downstream, if you're doing those things, then what's left? You want to look in terms of downstream. This is after you used it, you're ready to discard it. You think about reuse, you think about composting, you think about recycling. And in a municipal system, I just want to bring up that a great percentage of your customers actually self-haul, actually load it in their cars or their trucks and take them to the landfill or the transfer station. And so you need to have opportunities for them to engage in the recycling and zero waste process. And we use zero waste parks as an example. Next slide. The first step is in the planning step. And like Ruth was saying, it's a stakeholder process. This is from LA. In LA, when we did the zero waste plan, it took over a year and a half, 2 years, and we had like 11 districts and oh, God knows how many different meetings. And Gary and Neil and I and Ruth were part of the team, and we never missed one. No, we never missed one of the public meetings because this is where the stakeholders were getting involved. And through the conversation, we came up with the zero waste plan. At the last meeting, when we all adopted the plan, this is who showed up. It's a huge crowd. And what I'm saying is you need to get the stakeholders involved in the process because when you go to the city council or the board of supervisors, they're going to be in the audience. If it's just you, it's okay, you against the board. But if they see the stakeholders there, they're most likely to deal with it. I've never been into a zero waste plan that did not get a unanimous vote from its board by its council. Remarkable in LA, it was like a 9-0 vote. Split councils, like in Oceanside, was a 5-0 vote for this because this is a bipartisan issue. It's really about efficiency. It's about quality of life. Next slide. In the planning process, we talk about the community participation, and the first of the workshops were visioning workshops, and we like to do, like in Fort Collins, one of the big breweries is one of the biggest operations in Fort Collins, and they're a zero waste organization. So we'll talk about zero waste, but we'll bring in the brewery to talk about what they do. A great example was, I think it was Logan, Ohio or Illinois. We had done a zero waste training, and the city manager, the solid waste coordinator, said to us, "It'll never happen here, or my council won't do it." And I saw him a couple of years later and he says, "Guess what? We're a zero waste city now." And I said, "Well, what happened?" He says, "Well, the executives from Honda, which are the biggest factory in our city, showed up at the city council and said, if we can get to zero waste, you ought to be able to do it." That's, for a politician, a council member who's supposed to be working in the public interest, these are important things that they need to see. Then in the planning charrettes, what I do is I break them down into the categories of collection I like to see. One is recycling, of course, and then organics is the second one. And reusables, I think reusables ought to be banned from the landfill, collected separately in flatbed trucks, and give a chance for the repairers and the reusers to get it before we dismantle it. So we can bring them together and we say, look, if we banned all the recyclables from the landfills, what are your businesses going to need to be able to survive? In Austin, we brought in all the organic stakeholders together, from the composters to the landscapers to the packing houses. Everybody that was part of the system was brought into the room. And then what Gary and I said is our intention is to recommend to the city council that we're going to ban organics from the landfill, which means we have no competition. Well, at that point, we just stepped back because we created a conversation they hadn't had before. And finally, when uh, Mr. Gosh, Oshkosh, Mr. Compost by Gosh, said, "Yeah, I've been doing this for years, cherry picking all kinds of scraps and composting in my area system." And everybody looked at me and said, "Well, who are you selling them to?" Just a little group out here, Home Depot. So, I mean, I'm saying that you want to do it. Same thing with the thrift stores and the Goodwill and Salvation Army, the reusers. Get them in the same room. Let them know that you're thinking of not letting this stuff go in the landfill, and asking them what they think they need to get going. And then you get a stakeholder engagement in the process, and then we're able to now define the kinds of needs of the community. And then the next step is to look at what's going on. What's your current policies, programs, and facilities? And again, at your level, as manager levels, the policies are really important because they drive what you do. In the city, it's the solid waste ordinance. In a factory, it's coming from the board of directors. But it's all about policies, programs, and facilities. And what you want to look at that and say, okay, what do we need to meet these stakeholder needs if we go this way? And it's able to, you'll find things like policies on purchasing, separation policies. What kind of facilities do we need? Oh, we need a baler, or we need to have a materials recovery facility in our city. Anyhow, these are identified in terms of that process. We do what's called a service opportunities analysis, which basically we look at everything that's generated. There's about 70 categories of materials that are identified in waste composition studies. And then we'd like to say, okay, I've got a mattress. What do I do on mattress? What do I do with this mattress in Fort Collins? And so we look for the mattress council, or we look for a place that takes the mattresses, and we evaluate it. And we say, okay, of all the things we had, where did we not find a place to put it? Typically, food scraps is one. There's no food scrap area to take your food. And so that's a void or an opportunity to develop a composting program to use food scraps. So that's what the service analysis is all about. Then there's a menu of zero waste strategies and options. And then once we lay that out, then we'll do a strategic plan to get to the goal. Next slide. It's important to involve the public in this. In this case, this is Los Angeles, and there's a financial plan and implementation plan. The last one we sat around the table in work groups and said, okay, what about this and what about that? And we measured what the degree of opinions were on different issues. The one I liked with the best was when we talked about how many shoes you can have. And of course, some around the table said, the government can't tell me how many pairs of shoes I have, as long as I take care of my own shoes. On the other hand, other people said, well, nobody should have more than 3 or 4 pairs of shoes. And well, we finally agreed on that you ought to be able to reuse, repair, and recycle the shoes. At least we all agreed on that. Next slide. So the examples of visioning, I talked a lot about this in the first slide, but I'll go over some of this stuff. The visioning, the new policy and program initiatives, economic analysis, draft place, these are the topics. Again, we talked about green businesses, city departments, service providers, community and civic groups, property managers, the faith community. These are all people. So I would say like a fourth charrette would be community activists, people who want to change the education or are pushing the city councils to ban polystyrene. These are churches. I think probably the best talk I ever get. I was asked by the Methodist Church to speak to their green team, and they said, yeah, after a conversation, said, we want you to talk to the congregation. I went, about setting up a recycling program? No, about why we have to do this. And we gave a great talk, and I had 3, 4 council members get up and testify that they were going to make it recycle. It made the holler get up and do it. It was a tremendous hallelujah thing. So I communities we found in Grand Rapids that the Dutch Calvinists believe in stewardship. So there was no argument there. If you believe in stewardship of resources, now let's talk about how we get it done. Next slide. So we talk about service opportunity analysis, and we talk about marketing these materials. I just say straight out, everybody should know who their hauler is for sure, but your hauler is not the market. The hauler is selling it to somebody else. And if you're a recycler or a zero waster, you really understand, you need to understand the recycling and compost industries. And once you look at what's out there, we can, Dan Knapp figured this out. Dr. Knapp got a job at a landfill when he was a young man salvaging materials. And as PhD in sociology, he realized that if he grouped them, he had a better chance of selling them. And so he came up with these 12 market categories. And bottom line is, if you get the materials in this market category, there's a market for it. Now if it's paper, it's got to be all paper. It can't be paper and plastic and food. It's got to be all paper, but there's a market for mixed paper. So these are the 12 categories. I show here that half, if you look at half, plant debris, putrescible things that rot, putrefy, soils, wood, and some paper like tissues and napkins are compostable. So half of what you generate as a discard in a city, a business is not quite that way, unless you're probably a cafeteria or a restaurant. But in a city, half of what's going into the landfill is organic. We thought, if we would have gone after the organics first, the recycling would have been a lot easier. But we went after the money back in the 70s and the 80s. Today, with the methane that is generated from the landfill and the greenhouse gas, the leachate that's going into the landfill, the fact that farmers need good soil and not petrochemicals to build their crops and conserve water, it's a great idea to do like the city of San Diego and create composting systems. And I say right on the landfill. I mean, that's where the closed part of the landfill is never going to be used again. There's your composting facility. So you have 12 market categories. Next slide. And these are how they break out. And again, when we do the surface opportunity analysis, we go through these categories. So, in the reusable side, again, if you had textiles, where would you take them? Now, I run textiles as a separate category as well, because clothing and marketing of rags is a big market out there. It really is. Books, catalogs, other repairables, these are all reusables. When we look at the value in the landfill, it's this category here that really is worth the most. If you pull them out and separately, if there's a couple $100 a ton value if you had a ton of reusable materials. Paper, these are all the different paper categories. Again, mixed paper will sell, but if you had it in cardboard and you had it in white ledger, there's a lot more money in it. So a lot of the mixed papers will buy it mixed paper, and then they will high grade it out. They'll hire people to sort it, and for the high grade, that's worth it for sure. Plant debris, this is leaves and grass, prunings, branches and stumps. In San Diego, all our cities have yard waste collection. This was one of the first things we did when we developed the recycling programs in the 90s. And so there are people who are grinding up yard waste and making it into mulch, and the farmers love the stuff. They really do. Wood breaks down into two categories, treated and untreated. I don't know what to do with treated wood. If I could get all the organics out of the landfill, that may be where I'd put it, because I don't want to burn it and I don't want to compost it because it's got all kinds of bad chemicals in it. Ceramics, the definition of ceramics are things that crumble or rock. So concrete, asphalt pavings. Next slide. These are the rocks. Now, when they did the AB 939 in California and told the cities, if you go under 50%, it's a $10,000 fine. And the public works directors realized that the aggregate, the rock, was sometimes 5 to 10% of what was going into the landfill. No city manager, no roads foreman will let rock go in the landfill. And when you see a takedown here in San Diego, like with Qualcomm, you'll see piles and piles of aggregate. And this will be ground up and used again to make products. Soil, gypsum board, and fines. Metals, of course, mixed metals, all you need is a magnet. You got the steel, and then the rest is money because it's non-ferrous. Glasses, we don't have as much problem with glass around here as they do in some areas of the country. Uh, Clear glass is by far the most valuable because you can add color to it. Once you get color in glass, they can't change it. But Gallo buys a lot of mixed cullet. That's what broken glass is called because they make those green bottles. Textiles, polyfibers, and cotton and woolen. It used to be that polyfibers were hard to sell, but today there's a huge market for polyfibers and cotton and woolen. So a lot of it's used in cottons and woolens are used in absorbents for spills and stuff, but most of the stuff is being reused in terms of people wearing it. Polymers are plastic. We know that ones and twos are very valuable. Also, polypropylene market is growing very good. Typically, these are 3 through 7s are voids. Tires are ground up and made into uh, uh, road surfaces or filters or gaskets. And there are markets for them. And then finally, chemicals don't go in the landfill, folks. It can't go in, and therefore it's got to be separated out. But if you put them on a shelf, people will take them and use them, and that's a lot of cities do that. Next slide. So when you look at all these 12 categories and you're looking at me and you're saying, Rick, that's all well and good, but nobody's going to separate into 12 categories. Well, that's not true. There's a city in Japan, very small city, and they don't have a landfill. They have a transfer station, but it's something like 17, 20 categories. I'm not sure what Ruth knows exactly what it is, but it's a lot of categories. But you can do that on a transfer station where you self-haul and you can have all places to put things. And most people will do the sorting. But in order to make it easy as far as my mind, I saw the MRF, the blue bin, papers and containers. These can be sent to a materials recovery facility on a conveyor belt. Magnets will pull out the metals. Um, and in the more sophisticated facilities, like in the EDCO, they have lasers that will knock off the polymers. They have eddy current magnets to take out the aluminum, and then paper is floated and glass is dropped, and they actually do a pretty good job with these taking in 1,000 tons a day and having less than 15% of residual. And a lot of the residuals are not misthrows. It's just the stuff that people throw in the recycling that really doesn't belong. That's one of the problems. So paper and containers, I say use a blue bin. That's because I like the color blue for recycling. I'd like to make it the law, but anyhow, most people see blue as the recycling container. Uh, Organics, again, these are food, vegetative debris, food dirty paper, plant debris, putrescimals and wood could go in the green bin. This would go to a compost facility, never go to a landfill. Whereas the paper and containers go to the materials recovery facility, never go to the landfill. The organics go to the composting facility, never go to the landfill. And then from there, they're processed and used as soil amendment. Reusable items, I'd say the same thing. Furnitures, appliances, clothing, tools, whatever. They should be set aside. You don't discard this stuff on a weekly basis. On a monthly or yearly basis, you call your collector, or they do a pickup on call. We saw this work in Los Angeles very well. It's an on call. The hauler actually has a clipboard with your address on it, and you pick the stuff up. It goes to a warehouse where we let some pickers do the stuff. And then on the special discards, these are your chemical and your construction and demolition debris and wood and chemical soils. We say, we create a resource recovery park at the transfer station or at the landfill where these materials can be placed. So these are what I'd say market clusters, how you would separate. Next slide. So this is just some pictures, examples of what I saw in terms of reuse and repair. The one on top is on the East Coast. I want to talk just a little bit about reusable wood, Habit for Humanity. Um, does a lot of used wood sales. So the good lumber that can be used again, there are certifiers that will certify it, and you can get a hold of that. I think it's a good market for that. We need to separate it out. The one on the left-hand corner is the Last Chance Mercantile. This is on the landfill up in Monterey. When you drive into the landfill, and on that landfill, it's amazing. There's a big materials recovery facility. There's also a lot of the land to composters, two or three different composting companies who are taking the organic material and composting right on the site. And then there's the landfill. But before you even get in, um, you stop at the mercantile and unload your reusables. When I do my zero waste tours and we stop there, we watch the vendors are at the door. More great majority of the stuff never makes it to the shelf. The vendors catch it as quick as they can, and I know that the same case is in Goodwill over in San Ysidro, which is right on the Mexican border. When they put their lot sales on, um, there's the cars coming in from Tijuana, just long lines. Uh, these are just the last picture is where I think is lots of opportunities for material recovery. Uh, we need to have facilities where you can, if you had an old Victorian house and you needed to find a sink that was 100 years old, you'd find it at a materials yard. Urban Ore is a great example in Berkeley of that. Next slide. So that's recycling. This top one is Santa Monica's yard. You can see the paper and cardboard that's being moved. All their stuff is outside. The one on the right on top is Cal State Long Beach. The recycling center that we started in the 70s was still operating up until last February when COVID hit and the student workers all evaporated. We'll hope they start up again. But this was put on right on the campus and became a major source of money for the students. They'd bring in their beer cans and get cash so they could buy more beer, I guess. The one on the bottom side, is a typical container, and one of my key things is that the containers have to be they have to be signed. You have to have signage on the container so that people know what they have to put in. In this case, this is San Luis Obispo. This is San Diego counties, I think. And what we have it in both pictures and in English and in Spanish. And what that does is helps the purity of the source separation. And the last piece is a little resource recovery park that we put on the front end in San Luis Obispo. And again, you come in here, you drop off your discards, and then you go into the landfill. And the thing I want to point out is, in my opinion, the 50 years in this business is that, you know, 3-yard bins are 3, 4 feet high. So you have to lift that stuff to put it in the bin. Whereas if you dump down, and that's if you see what we used is bunkers with K-rail, and you would dump down into the bunker with your material and then drive off. And then we can look and see if there's any contaminants, get that out. And then with a little front loader, we'll move it into the roll-off bin, and from that to the baler to the markets. These are easy to do. It didn't take us much to just put the asphalt in and get the K-rail down. Signage was the next issue to be done before we took this picture, but I think you can do this almost anywhere where you have a little bit of land. Next slide. So composting, this is our big issue for California. Here's an example. On the first slide is the piles and going into the trommel, which is going to separate the light from the heavy. The second slide is the aerobic system. Oh no, go back. I'm sorry. The second picture is the aerobic system that they're using up in. This was up in Zanker Road in San Jose. The only problem they had was what do you do with that plastic after it was done? But I guess they could use it again. The bottom picture is a windrow, which is I like is the cheapest form of composting. Airboard is worried about the emissions, but to me, there's never been a real test showing that any real emissions other than a trace ammonium and then carbon dioxide from the windrow. In an anaerobic digester, there's a methane byproduct because of the way it's done without air. And the last piece is just a drop-off area on the landfill where all the green material goes. Next slide. So next slide is special discards. I just point out on the rock pile there in Fort Collins, we talked to the building um, permit director, and when you have to get a demo or construction permit, he's the one. And we talked about it. He says, we have a yard for aggregate that everybody in the city uses, and so you're right. I'm going to just make it a rule that anybody who builds or takes down must separate all the aggregate, and they can take it to us or they can use it themselves. And it didn't have to do in the ordinance. He had the power as the director to be able to do that. hazardous waste facilities, well, you have to have areas to take household hazardous materials at your landfill. The bottom left is we've realized that when they banned TV sets from the landfill, that we had a missed opportunity. We went through a prison and saw how they separated it, and so we hired college students and took the leaded glass out and the computer components, and those were all marketable. The only thing that went to the landfill was the frames, wooden frames. And the last piece on bricks, these are worth about $1 a piece. It's crazy to throw bricks away. What's the next slide look like? So this is our resource recovery park. We were in England. What a great project. Maxine got us money from DEFRA, which was the English Environmental Defense Fund. And we basically met with all the stakeholders. And what happens in England is that the residents and the multifamily are pretty well taken care of. It's the business that are left besides. And what was happening is that under the EU, the landfill prices were ratcheting up. It was like, I don't know, I'm just taking a while. It's about a couple $100 a ton, and even moving up every year in terms of that. So we talked to the businesses and said, if there was an easy way for you to dispose of this stuff, would you use it? And they said yes. So this was designed by one of our zero waste team, Mark, and what he did is it's sort of his approach is that you enter in the middle, okay, with all your 12 categories, and around you'll drop off at the reuse area, and then there's a recycling area, and there's a compost area, and the last thing would be a little bin for your plastic ceramic. Not just kidding. In the middle would be a information center. On the outside, the vendors would pick up the baled material on the outside. So you always had traffic in, and you had the trucks on the outside and do it. Now, we've presented this concept in a lot of different places, and it's happened differently in a lot of different places. But the basic concept of allowing a drop off of the 12 categories, Delta Norte is the one where there's a resource recovery park going on. Cerrito has a nice little circular resource recovery park. It's an interesting idea, but the key is to make it easy to get in and get out, and also make it easy for your vendors to pick up their materials. Next slide. So that's El Cerrito. So in Castro Valley, when we did the opportunity analysis, these were the kinds of materials that were found that needed markets and needed work on, and we're working on that. Next slide. There's your 12 market categories. Next slide. In the policies, programs, facilities, these are the issues that you look for. You get your goals. You look at grants or revolving loan funds, and you look at financing, and then you look at facilities, recovery parks, R&D facilities, museums of bad design. Next slide. Then you develop a zero waste strategic plan. Next slide. The key issues is that somebody has to ask to adopt zero waste. Usually takes a community group or a green team to ask the administration to take a look at it. You need to connect to other problems, jobs, economy, facility siting, educate and build support, and identify and promote local zero waste businesses. All right, that's my slides. I want to introduce our next speaker, Michael Wansidler.